think some people need to
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for, sorry about the long break there.
Yeah,
and I'd like to thank Dr. Cooper for his excellent presentation. Unfortunately, it would have been great for another 2 hours, but we're trying to fit everything in. What I'm just going to explain to you is that Dr. Cooper, as you'll gather, would have explained it in the technical side of it. I'm going to do it in a very simplified form to sort of explain it. So my job as a lawyer is to try and convince a judge or somebody up there who doesn't know the technical side of it, and I've got to try and interpret that and make it simple for the judge to understand, if that makes sense. So in essence, that's what I'm going to try and do for you, is simplify it all so that the layperson will understand the law and how it applies and how it works. Now, first of all, I'd just like to talk about a document that the Penzer rely on. Now, the Penzer is a set of standards that has been set by the Australian government under the Penzer Act. And the standard is, basically they set up a standard saying, okay, this is what we believe are the safety standards that should be used in admissions. Now, there's a supporting document which is available on the Penzer website, and it's a document by a gentleman, a doctor called Dr. Bruce Hocking, who's a specialist in occupational medicine. And he's actually a member of Penzer. He works very closely with them, and they rely on a lot of his work. Now, I'm just going to explain to you who Dr. Hocking is. In 1998, Dr. Hocking did a study. He was the chief medical officer for Telstra at the time. And what he did was he wanted to see what, he wanted to see if there was an incidence or a high incidence of cancer around towers, and he just studied, I believe there were 3 towers that he did a study around. And he found a 60% increase in childhood leukemia around that tower. He then reported it, he basically got it peer reviewed, and it was placed in the Australian Medical Journal. And then once that was done, he was immediately sacked. Now, the interesting thing is they still rely on Professor Hocking, and it's still in here. And I'm going to read an article of his, which is the current one. And just to give an idea, he's one of the leading experts in regards to childhood leukemia around the world, which a lot of other countries use. Unfortunately I can't put it up on the screen, but it's called Medical Aspects of Overexposures to Electromagnetic Fields. Now this is it's on the website, and they rely on this particular document to support their Penzer guidelines. And being me, I had to read through it. And what I'd like to first of all explain to you is that in this document, it talks about volts per metre. And you probably noticed that Dr. Cooper was explaining the milliwatts and etc. and all those sorts of things. And it's very, very technical stuff. And you just have to change it, convert it into another one, and it gets really confusing. So we're just going to do it on what we call volts per metre. Is that okay? That's it. Now what that means is, the way I interpret it, is that if I've got a device which is a metre away, the arc or the electric field that's coming from there to me, within a metre, how many volts in that electric field are coming through the air to me. And that's as simple as it gets. Now, in this study that is on the Penzer website, and they use it as a supporting document to their guidelines, or to their standards, and it's basically done in the 50 to 60 hertz range, which is not much, is it, Dr. Cooper? Now, remember that the standards go from 3 to how many? 300, is that correct, Dr. Cooper? Yeah, to 300 gigahertz. So 3 kilohertz, which is a lot smaller than a hertz, up to 300 gigahertz, which is way bigger. So this study was just done on a very small little hertz range between 50 to 60. What's 5G? High gigahertz, thank you. Anyway, in this small field, which is very, very low, this study says this: there is a very wide range in excitability of tissue ranging from alteration of synapse activity in the brain at 0.0775 volts per metre peak. That's less than 1 volt, okay? The stimulation of a diameter nerve is 6.1 volts per metre peak. Of cardiac muscle, it's 12 volts per metre peak. So it's not much, is it, when you think about 12 volts? Now, he then goes on and talks about occupational standards and public standards. And this thing is designed basically for the occupational health and safety sphere. So let's have a little look at what he says here. Standards are set to prevent these effects. The 2009 IGNIRP standard limits the induced in situ electric field to 0.01 of a volt per metre at 50 hertz, and they termed that as the basic restriction. Now, that's the reference level. So basically what they're saying is that 0.01 of a volt, okay, for a worker should not be exposed to anything above that. So 0.1 of a volt, okay? So if I'm a worker, occupational health and safety, according to this and according to the Penzer website, says, hey, that's dangerous. I'm going to read this. The public exposure limit is set at 200 volts per metre. That's, with my calculation, that's about 20,000 times higher than the occupational safety limit. Now I've got a little phone in my pocket. Okay, mobile phone.
Not where you should have it.
No, I shouldn't have. I've had my kids, so sorry about it. Now,
I'm mad at my liking.
And it's a little device that you can buy from JCar or anything like that. Very simple little device, and I'll read it out to you. It's made by Digitech. It says, smartphone electromagnetic sensor plug-in module. That's about 20 bucks. Okay? And it measures electromagnetic VM readings. All right? So, I have it in my phone. I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to turn it on. And I'm going to go to the app. There's a little app that comes with it. And we're going to measure what the ambient electromagnetic radiation volts per metre is in this room now. Now remember, what's the occupational standard? Supposedly? Yeah, okay. 133, 132. I don't know if you can read that, it's changing as we go around. 230. What's it on now? Oh, it's over my computer, that's why. Okay. All right, so can you see that, folks? Now, what's the public exposure limit? 200, that's correct. Now, I'm going to get a volunteer to come up here. Anybody? Up you come. Right. Hello, how are you? Now, as Dr. Cook was talking about how your skin can be a receptor or a conductor, okay? That's the ambient voltage, okay, per metre. Can you touch the little black thing on the bottom, please? What's it reading?
It dropped up to 700 and then it went down.
Went up to 700 and went down to what?
No, it's 188, 201.
Okay, thank you. Let's get someone else. Who wants to have another go? So here we go, ambience around 133, 466. Okay, thank you. Now, looks really good, doesn't it? Do you think I could use that in court? Okay. We could try and do it, but we'd have to have every expert under the sun to explain the calibration and how this thing works and all that sort of stuff. But that's probably a simple demonstration of how electric current in the air works and how there's a real sort of issue in regards to the difference between what science is saying is safe and what's not. We're currently witnessing probably the largest change to the Earth's electromagnetic environment that has ever taken place in human history. And this change has taken place over a very short period of a handful of decades and continues to escalate at an exponential rate. Given that household electricity, which is the first man-made electromagnetic field, only became prolific after the turn of the century, artificial EMF has barely seen one generation from cradle to grave. The use of high-frequency microwave devices such as mobile telephony, Wi-Fi and smart meters have suddenly become commonplace, despite almost no safety testing and decades of evidence of potentially lethal effects. Now we've got 5G. Now the thing you understand about that, 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, you're still going to get that. They're just adding an extra antenna up there and everything, and they're going to give you 5G now. Okay? Now this has sparked fierce political and scientific debate that is gathering momentum on a daily basis, and it's raising concern about the continued use of such devices. And one may assume that when assessing or witnessing the vast implementation of, for example, Wi-Fi in the home, school, hospitals, paediatric wings, etc., workplace or even the public domain, that experts have provided sufficient evidence of safety to overwhelm scientific concern. Now folks, from what I can see, this is not the case. So that's where I come into it, and I then have to work out a solution on how to negate or try and sort of stop the emissions by using law in the way that best way we can. Now, first of all, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a thing called nuisance. Get a real basic understanding of what electromagnetic radiation is. Can I get you up, madam? Is that all right? Could you just come forward, please? Now, here we have this lovely lady here. You can just stand there. Now, this lady, we have a mark. This is my boundary. I live here. Okay, you're over there. That's your property. This is mine. This is a tower. Okay, on somebody else's land. This is my land. There's a long-held law that says that I'm entitled to the free enjoyment of my land, free from the interference of my neighbour. So, as a resident, if I'm living on this particular property, this person is not allowed to interfere with my private enjoyment. Okay? Now, for example, let's say she was very noisy and she had music very, very loud and was playing it 24 hours a day. What can I do about it? I can phone the police, I can call the council, I can do all sorts of things. And that's exactly where we're going. Okay? So, in essence, a noise complaint is one way of stopping it. What really is noise? They're waves, aren't they? Frequencies coming through the air. It's very, very similar. Now imagine, for example, you had a whole heap of car tyres in your backyard and you started burning them, okay? And all the smoke was wafting over from your fence onto my fence, okay? Now if that was just a one-off, I understand that. But imagine you did it every day, 24 hours a day, and I started getting sneezing, coughing, etc. Could I stop her? Yeah. But the way to stop her is I go and see my doctor and say, I'm coughing, I'm spluttering, this thing's hurting me, let's stop it. That's basically what nuisance is. Okay, so it's a tool that's used in law to try and stop the neighbour from interfering with to interfere with your quiet enjoyment of the land. What is the sole purpose of a tower? What's it designed for? To emit radiation from that property onto mine. That's its sole purpose. Thank you. Thank you. Now,
to be a nuisance.
electromagnetic radiation is considered, particularly in a lot of other states, as either a pollutant or a contaminant. Okay, so in essence, there's environmental laws that we can use, and I'll discuss about that shortly. But what I'm going to talk to you about now is something very, very interesting. Let's say I don't want this lady to emit electromagnetic radiation against me. What can I do to say stop? Okay? It's actually coming, it's hurting me, I'm getting dizzy, I'm getting itchy eyes, I'm getting brain fog. I'm actually feeling very unwell. Okay? It seems to happen every time you turn that thing on, I get quite sick. So how do I stop you? Well, not stop you, but try to work out a way of doing something there. I'm going to show you something. It's a little video, and this sort of explains a little bit about assault and what it means in Western Australia. So just have a look at this for a moment.
Assault charges in Western Australia. In Western Australia, assault charges are taken very seriously, no matter how minor the incident may be. Assault is dealt with under Part 5 of the Criminal Code 1913. The nature and severity of the assault will determine the charge that is laid against an offender and the penalty that will apply on conviction. Definition of assault. In Western Australia, an assault may occur by, for example, striking, touching, moving, or applying force of any kind to another person, either directly or indirectly, without the person's consent, or with their consent if it is obtained by fraud.
So let's just stop there for a moment. So, what is assault? It says striking, touching, moving, or the application of force. Let's continue. The application of force is the bit that I want you to look at.
It is not necessary for physical injury to have been caused to amount to an assault, as a charge may arise from an attempt or threat where the offender has, or appears to have, the ability to carry out the assault. In addition, assault may arise if an offender uses light, heat, electricity, odour, gas, or any substance that causes injury or personal discomfort to another person.
I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so in essence, it doesn't even have to have been happened, it can be a threat to do it. You understand that? So what it comes down to is a threat. If I tell somebody, hey, don't emit electromagnetic radiation against me, it's going to harm me, or I think it's going to harm me, and you don't stop and you continue to do that, am I in fear of you? Yeah, so that's the sort of basic premise how it works. Now, if I went and, the thing you have to understand is that it has to come down, the way I see it, is that, and that's how it seems to be working so far, is that we can use things like apprehended violence orders, peace and good behaviour orders, restraint orders, to try and stop telcos from emitting electromagnetic radiation. And that's exactly where this process went. And this is how it all started. Is we went to Brisbane and we had a lady who was being exposed to electromagnetic radiation, very, very concerned. And the Queensland jurisdiction at the time, there's a thing called a Peace and Good Behaviour Order, and there's what we know as the Peace and Good Behaviour Act. Now in that Act, I'm just going to read the complaint that's available to us, and it's quite easy to find on the internet. It's called Applying for a Protection under the Peace and Good Behaviour Act, which is what was done in Queensland. You also get a kit on how to fill one out in Queensland. Each state has a different application. But in a sense, what it's doing is to try and protect someone who feels that they're being assaulted and they want that to stop. Now in this case, the argument that we raised was that we were saying that electromagnetic radiation, if turned on and went from their fence onto my property, was going to cause harm. Now, we needed evidence of that. And it's a bit hard to go into a courtroom and say, hey, is this thing going to harm us? Or harm this particular person? Now, the best way to explain this is that we then got a doctor to assess this particular person to see if their fear of electromagnetic radiation was real. Was it something that they thought was going to harm them? Could they use it in a peace and good behaviour type complaint? Now, there's a case called McDonald and Comcare, which is in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. And this was a case, and I'll read the citation, it's McDonald and Comcare, 2018, Administrative Appeals Tribunal, 105. Now in this particular case, there was a Dr. McDonald, he started realising he was getting very sick from in his office, in his workplace, and he thought, how am I going to try and you know, I'll tell my employer, hey, look, I'm getting quite ill, I can't go to work, can you do something to fix up? They tried all sorts of things, setting up Faraday cages and all sorts of stuff. He then decided to take them to court to seek compensation for workers' compensation. And what he did was he went through the courts, he got some experts. One of them was Dr. Cooper, sitting over there, and the other one was the one I just read about to you before, was Dr. Bruce Hocking. And they were both Dr. McDonald's experts. Whatever the science was that they came up with, they explained it to in the administrative appeal. So what happened? In the court case, and basically said, look, this thing's is it an ailment? Is it a disease? Is it something is EHS a real thing? What was handed down was that, based on the belief of what the doctor has said, that this thing is actually going to harm you, or it's potentially going to harm you, and that you've got EHS, then Dr. McDonald thought, well, then that's my belief that this thing's going to harm, or it's causing my ailment. The tribunal said that yes, this is an ailment. It's the first time it was recognised in Australia that EHS was sort of put on the scene, so to speak, and he won the case. And that was McDonald and Comcare. Now, the whole thing about that case that I interpreted from that was it only had to be instilled a reasonable fear in a particular person that it was going to harm. Now, I'll keep going. This is where we get to counsels. Okay? There's a case called the Telstra Corporation Limited against Hornsby Shire Council 2006, New South Wales LEC, which means the Land Environment Court 133. Now in this particular case, I'll just read, this is the reasons to the judgment, and I'll just read the very first part. To the northwest of Sydney lies the suburb of Cheltenham. It's a suburb with heritage charm, with a number of late 19th and early 20th century homes and gardens. And remarkably for these days, the suburb is solely residential, with no commercial or retail activities within the boundaries of the suburb. At the heart of the suburb is the Cheltenham Recreational Club, and the club's site is large, about 1.78 hectares, and contains recreational sporting facilities including bowling greens, croquet courts, etc. The club has been, however, the suburb of Cheltenham is not isolated from the modern world. Residents or visitors or travellers through the suburb wish to engage each other. I'll just read, the nature of the appeal was that a telecommunications carriers wishes to basically set up a telecommunications tower on this particular site. What had happened is that they lobbied council, and everybody in the community wrote letters to council and said, hey guys, we're concerned, we've looked on the internet, we're not happy with it, we're not happy, this is a development application. It was what is known as a high impact facility, so they had to make an application to council, and people had to put submissions in if they objected to it. Now, all the submissions that people objected to were just people's personal opinions. So they, oh yes, I'm scared of it, I got it from the internet, I did this, blah, blah, blah. And they put their submissions in. The council agreed with the members of the public and knocked back the development application. But subsequently, Telstra appealed it. And they won. And how they won it is that basically, and I'll read this to you. In this case, the residents' perceptions of an adverse effect on the health and safety of residents and on the environment by exposure to RF EME emitted from the proposed base station are without justification in objective, observable, likely consequences. The claimed effects are unsubstantiated and without reasonable evidentiary foundation. So, what that means is that basically when they say that they didn't have reasonable evidentiary foundation, is that their submissions that they made to council as in general members of the public wasn't backed up with any evidence. Okay? And this is seen all over the place where councils have knocked back applications, development applications. The telcos just simply come back and appeal, in essence, and win on the appeal because they're saying the decision of the environment court or the council, etc., particularly the council, was based on unreasonable evidentiary. There was no evidence basically in that. So they overturned the decision. Now, in these circumstances, there's been so many cases where this has happened, where councils have been overturned, and I'll just rattle off some of them. McIntyre and the Christchurch City Councils in New Zealand. There's the Optus Communications and Corporation West Kensington and Norwood. There's the Shirley Primary School and Telecommunications Limited case. There's the Hyatt and Corrugated Shire Council and Telstra in VCAT. And it goes on and on and on. There's a whole list, Merritt City councils. There's been so many councils that have been knocked back based on that. So after reading that, I realised that what we need to do is find a way of getting evidence so that when people make a complaint to council, it has to be substantiated and backed up with some evidence that yes, these things are going to harm, and possibly I have a firm belief or got a belief of some sort that's going to harm me. And that's where the doctors come into it. So basically what it was is getting a doctor to go and see a doctor, ask the doctor, is this safe? If I'm going to be exposed to this electromagnetic radiation, can you please tell me, can you look at all the science, see what's going on, and in your opinion, give me an opinion as to whether it's safe or not. Now, depending on what comes back from the doctor, you get that opinion back, and then what you do is you go, okay, you then send a letter. If the opinion comes back quite good and it says, yes, this is going to harm, I can tell you now that it's not safe to be in the vicinity of that particular tower, etc., then what you do is you simply put that letter, or the doctor's opinion, with your letter to knock back the development application. Does that make sense? And then using that, you then have enough evidence, in essence, or some evidence to back up your claim, and that'll give councils the power to hopefully assist. Now, I'm now going to talk about how this worked with Wilson's Creek and how it worked with Dundas Street in regards to the Coogee residents in Dundas Street. Now, I'll just read this out to you. This is for Dundas Street. This is the one that what happened here was we had, there's about 8 doctors that lived on the street. There were 4 lawyers. The TPG wanted to install a small cell facility right on their street, and they were very upset about it. They then contacted me to come up and see if there was some way we could sort this out. So what I did is I did what's called an advice. And I'm going to read some of this advice to you, and this sort of might clarify where I'm going. Okay. So this is how it started. You instruct that a proposal by various entities to install mobile phone infrastructure on your street has been propositioned by a joint enterprise comprising of TPG Telecom, Urbis and Pipe Networks, and we call them TPG for the sake of the advice. You instruct that you are fearful that electromagnetic radiation emissions from the facility will cause harm or discomfort to residents and visitors who either live on or visit your street, and that you require an advice as to remedy. You advise that TPG has informed you that the level of EMR emissions proposed to be emitted from the facility will be well below the safety limit as set by the Penzer guidelines under authority of the ARPANS Act. My advice is as follows. There are available on the ARPANSA website fact sheets produced by ARPANSA that advises that sensitivity to EMR is a real and disabling problem, and if anybody is concerned that you should seek the advice of a medical specialist. My advice to you is to follow ARPANSA's advice and seek a professional opinion from a medical practitioner who specialises in EMR as to whether the emissions proposed to be emitted from the facility may or may not pose a risk of harm or discomfort to you. Now, as Dr. Cooper said, that in the forward to the ARPANSA guidelines, the CEO, John Loy, states that it's recognised that the standard does not operate in isolation from the legal framework within Australia. Relevant Australian occupational health and safety and environmental laws provide obligations on employers and the designers, manufacturers and suppliers of plant and equipment to ensure that their activities or their plant and equipment do not represent a risk to the health and safety of the employees or third parties who may be affected by them. In effect, such laws require relevant parties to continually assess and improve the health and safety impact of their activities. Now, the Penzer forward reflects, in essence, that the precautionary principle actually applies. If there is a risk of harm or discomfort as advised by a medical practitioner, then the precautionary principle and ecologically sustainable development must be applied as a matter of state policy. The exercise of the precautionary principle concerning ecologically sustainable development is a primary consideration as found within New South Wales state policy and is reflected and required to be applied in numerous provisions within New South Wales legislation. If a medical practitioner is of the opinion that EMR emissions from the facility will cause harm, then I suggest you forward a copy of any such medical advice to TPG, who will then be placed on notice of that opinion. After receiving such notice, TPG will have a general environmental duty to apply the precautionary principle when making its decision as to whether or not it heeds medical opinion or remains steadfast, in falling behind the Penzer guidelines. And this is the thing, you'll find that most emitters or telcos or power utility companies always hide behind the Penzer guidelines and say we're merely following the guidelines, that's that. The precautionary principle must be the relevant primary consideration to be made by TPG as to whether to proceed with the installation of the facility. TPG will be subject to possible legal liability both in the civil jurisdiction and also in the criminal jurisdiction, particularly after it's been made aware that medical opinion says its EMR emissions will harm. Though in this case, this is a low impact facility. Now, if you understand how this works, you have two different types. You have a high impact facility and a low impact. High impact means that it's a very tall facility, it's visually not appealing. You can make an application saying, I don't like the development because it's too high, it doesn't look good. That's high impact. Low impact is when it's below, it doesn't have any visual sort of issues. And what's happened is you'll find that the emissions that are coming from these things are not part of the high and low impact situation. With Wilson's Creek, the tower was a high impact facility, so it had to go through a development application through the council. In this one, it was a totally different story. It was a low impact facility, so they didn't have to go through council. So you probably wonder, how does this work? With Wilson's Creek, what happened there was I basically gave them advice. They then sent the advice to council, along with their medical practitioners' reports from various members of the community. So they were overwhelmed with those. We then got an audience before the council to actually discuss what our situation was, and I've got it here, which I'd like to show you. And this is actually inside chambers. This is inside the council itself. Now, what I did there was I explained very carefully my advice, the precautionary principle, and how it applies, and how it would help council with their evaluation. So in effect, I assisted the gentleman who's about to speak, that's Steve, and he's from the ECSFR organisation, who was the group that was trying to lobby to stop the tower. On the right, we have Telstra. So we're going to hear both of them. All right, is that okay? Here we go.
Okay, against we've got Victoria and Steve representing the ECSFR. I'm sure we'll learn what that is.
Thank you. Victoria is generously allocated the time to myself, so My name is Stephen Tonagutso. I'm a fellow of the Institution of Engineers Australia, a 13-year resident of Hewinbrook by Wilson's Creek, and chair of the Community Association ECSFR, which is Environment and Community Safe from Radiation. There's a website under that name. I'm speaking for the recommendation of counsel and against the tower. You might recall in 2002 when phones made calls. Well, in 2002, Penzer published their radiation protection standard, and you will see, back when they made calls, the power levels were quite low. This is an indication of, as the levels increase, the impacts that research demonstrates. To quote from that standard, Penzer say, there is currently a level of concern about RF exposure which is not fully alleviated by the existing scientific data. It is true that data regarding biological effects at levels below the limits specified in the standard are incomplete and inconsistent. The health implications for these data are not known. That is the standard. The standard then goes on to say that laws require relevant parties to continually assess and improve the safety and health impact of their activities. Penzer is based on ICNIRP, which is an international standard, and they actually say the same thing. In the 16 years since 2002, telcos may not have followed the standard's requirements of continual improvement, but clearly staff of Byron Shire Council have. We applaud your staff for their application of the precautionary principle in recommendations 4 and 5 against the DA. Moreover, the Penzer standard states it is recognised that the standard does not operate in isolation from the legal framework within Australia. To this end, we look at section 1.3 of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, and we find that the objective of the Act, in summary, is to provide the social welfare by facilitating ecologically sustainable development whilst integrating social considerations. Section 1.4 of the Act tells us the definition of ecologically sustainable development. That's found in section 6.2 of the Protection of the Environment Administration Act 1991. We find in section 6 the objectives of this Act include preventing and reducing pollution. On the matter of pollution, consciously or unconsciously, residents chose to live in an area without mobile reception to be safe from harm and to not be assaulted by a pollutant against their will. We further find in section 6.2a of the Act specifically mentions the implementation of the precautionary principle. In recommendations for refusal of the DA, Council refers to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act of 1979, section 415. The evaluation of the DA must automatically follow the objective of the Act and the precautionary principle, and must consider ecologically sustainable development. If approved, Telstra will have a facility on its land that is intent on irradiating its neighbours with electromagnetic radiation, a pollutant. The electromagnetic radiation will become a nuisance if it is causing interference to the neighbour in the form of any discomfort, fear and harm. Based on the advice in the Penzer fact sheet from 2015, community members have obtained medical advice and provided this to Council. Council is therefore aware that electromagnetic radiation emissions from the tower will clearly cause a public or common nuisance, as implied in the majority of the 114 objection submissions. To this end, Council is correct in its application of the precautionary principle to reject the DA. In several legal cases, which our friend the barrister has provided, determined in the High Court, and I can distribute these for clarity, the current law makes it clear as follows. It's no justification that the inconvenience caused by it, in our case the tower, is less than the public benefit derived from its existence. In conclusion, we congratulate our elected Byron Shire Council in advance for making the decision to reject the Telstra Tower development application and thereby preserve the Wilson's Creek and surrounding valleys as a sanctuary for the environment, for the community, health and community amenity. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Okay, so that was Steve. Now, pretty much I scripted pretty much everything he said in there, obviously. But when we got to, let's have a look at what Telstra's response was. And so this will give you an indication of what we're against.
Dealing with the item mobile towers, which is 1313. They got here late and missed public access, so I will allow them to have their time now, also available obviously to answer questions from counsel. So I'll ask the gentleman
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to thank the Mayor. Thank you very much for allowing us this opportunity. And I work for Service Stream on Telstra. Firstly, I would like to just reiterate the reason why we proposed this mobile tower in this location was the Mobile Government Life Support Scheme. So this is a federal government scheme. And underpinning the Mobile Life Support Scheme is safety, road safety, particularly giving people in remote areas access to services that they wouldn't usually be able to access. Technology as well, being able to get benefits of technology similar to what people in the cities are able to receive. So the proposal at Wilson's Creek was indeed the best possible site in order to achieve these. The intended coverage for this proposal is the valley between Eulenbrook and Wilson's Creek, and the 35-metre monopole at the Telstra Scats would be the best facility to achieve this. 3 other candidates were considered, a total of 3 actual candidates were considered for this proposal. These included a property at 80 Eulenbrook Road and another property at 153 Eulenbrook Road. As part of our general site selection process, we usually, and we always make sure that we go through a strict and very rigid site selection, and the proposal at the Telstra Scats came through because it was the most buildable site, and we were able to secure property, which we were unable to do at one of the other properties, and it resulted in the least possible visual impact, and also it resulted in the least possible environmental impact, no clearing of trees, etc. Now, Telstra have also undertaken E&E studies into the potential electromagnetic radiation that would be released by this facility. And this has come in within the Australian standards, and it has come in also that I would like to reiterate also that this is a 3G and will be a 4G proposal. So on behalf of that, because of that, this is a proposal that is within all of our Australian and national standards and international standards. Service Stream has undertaken additional consultation with members of the public here. We undertook a community information session on the 3rd of July, where we provided members of the public with time to express their concerns. We have undertaken our due diligence for this proposal, and in that regard, we would like counsel, Barrister Counsel, to consider this proposal. I will now pass on to Representative Telstra.
Good morning, and thank you again for allowing us to speak. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is George Miguel. I'm the project manager for Telstra. I manage the various Blackspot programs. So we have a number of programs, Blackspot Phase 1, Phase 2, priority sites, and there'll be another one called Phase 4 coming up. So on my plate, I've been managing about over 150 sites in New South Wales, and there's over 700 sites nationally. So today, and the reason that we're doing Eulenbrook was identified as a Blackspot area, basically the proposed site as Scats does cover 57 houses, so we're contracted to cover 48. It's covering 57, which is 118%, and it covers 5.4 square kilometres of handheld coverage. The maps are available if required. In regard to the site selection, we'll attach on that. So obviously, this Scats is the most viable candidate for us. It's within budget, and also it's doable, and we can deliver that sites within time. Other sites were looked at, and obviously they were not chosen for various reasons. Property, the owner one of them was outside budget, and I believe the third one wasn't doable. I believe some questions were raised on how a site is selected and how the site is put on a national program. I encourage everyone, there is a website called MB Mobile Black Spot Program. So if you type this in Google, you will go to a government website called MBSP, and there's a process there that explains that. I'll go very quickly through that process, basically.
I might stop there, but you can see there was a big difference and contrast between the presentations there. But in essence, what happened was there were heaps of questions asked by counsel to Telstra in regards to the precautionary principle, in regards to the doctor's reports, etc. And they voted unanimously to reject the tower. And Telstra conceded that they weren't going to appeal based on the precautionary principle issues that were raised. So that was a win. That was a great win. So that's what happened there. Now, the case of so what happened here was it was all about arming counsel with the correct tools to make the decision, because a lot of councils don't want this stuff. It's quite clear. The councils have, if they make a decision, they're really worried they're going to be appealed against. And the way to give them the correct tools is to simply have a doctor's report attached to your letters of complaint, or whatever you want to call it, and go from there. And that's sort of how it worked. Now we use the same thing which is a little bit different, with the issue with Coogee. Now, what we had here was a low impact facility, which basically means it doesn't have to get council approval. And that's unfortunately is what 5G actually is in most cases. They don't put them on great big power poles, etc. They put them onto just normal light poles, etc. around the community, on people's roofs or whatever, and they're not very high impact. So they found there's a way in which they can get out of development applications through council. So then you're probably thinking, well, then council are powerless because they're not the ones that are approving the development. Okay? Well, that's not the case. You can still lobby council, even if there's no development application, and you can still lobby council even after the development has been approved by council. Okay? So you can still make some headway. What happened here is that in Dundas Street, as I said, there were quite a few doctors on the street and some lawyers who didn't want this stuff in their backyards. The trouble was that they couldn't go to council to make it wasn't a development application issue. What happened is that there is a thing that they had to, as a policy that the industry does, is that they're supposed to consult with the community, which is sort of like a bit of a simple way of saying they've consulted with the community before they put these things up. So what we did before we went to the meeting with TPG, we organised to have TPG there. We had some councillors from the council in the meeting. We had the doctors who are all obviously going to be affected by this thing. And then I also had my advice. Now, I haven't finished reading it to you, but my advice was also handed and served to, in essence, to the TPG people that were there. There was also some service of this document was actually sent to the directors of TPG as well. So basically everybody that was involved with this particular situation was served with this advice, plus the doctor's opinions as well, and letters of, hey, please don't do this. Now, I'll just continue now. So this is the advice to Coogee, so you understand the difference between low impact and high impact. Though the facility is low impact, a low impact facility is not required, pursuant to the Telecommunications Act, to seek development approval by the local council. It will be still subject to scrutiny via abatement for public nuisance in the case of threat or harm or discomfort. So councils can exercise a thing called abatement. So if they are aware that somebody's creating a nuisance, they can actually issue an abatement order or notice against the person that's creating the public nuisance. So I said this, I said, if TVG continues to law, advise that you write to counsel seeking an abatement notice. If counsel refuses to abate, then I would advise seeking a mandatory injunction to force counsel to issue an abatement to stop the nuisance. Now, what you can do here is that if counsel, you've armed them all with the letters, you've got your doctor's opinions, you've got the legal advice that's attached to it, and they don't abate, okay, you can then seek what's called a mandatory injunction, which is basically going to the Supreme Court or the District Court, and actually a mandatory injunction means to force a public utility or public organisation to do as the law says. If there's a nuisance and it's found to be one, then you've got to issue an abatement notice, and that's basically what was said here. And I said here, I can assist you in drafting such a letter to counsel if required to draft a mandatory injunction for you to file, and I'm willing to attend court to urge the matter if needed. So this is what they've got, this is what counsel got, TPG got, etc. The counsel is duty bound by state policy to apply the precautionary principle of the evaluation of the facility's impact. The Protection of the Environment Operations Act 1997, amongst other sources, can provide assistance on what ecologically sustainable development and the numerous principles incorporated in it mean. And I said here that I consider these matters to be taken into account under section 4.1 of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. And I explained where the reference is found, etc. Now, under section 4.15 of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, the reference to ecologically sustainable development in that Act's objective is found in section 1.3b, and the objective is being to facilitate ecologically sustainable development by integrating relevant economic, environmental and social considerations in decision-making about environmental planning and assessment, health being the primary element of such considerations. Now, there is the definition of an ecologically sustainable development, etc., in the Environmental Planning Assessment Act, and the Penzer approach to the precautionary principle is not the only relevant consideration. And this is the good one. The Land Environment Court is not limited on merits of assessment by the Penzer approach to the precautionary principle. And this approach was taken in a case called Carsons and Pittwater Council, Hutchinson Telecommunications, which I just read to you, etc. So the council must have a legally valid basis under which the principles of ecological sustainable development, the precautionary principle, can be applied by the said court. And telcos who intended to emit electromagnetic radiation have appealed many decisions made by other local councils who have rejected development in the past. Councils have lost appeals based on unsupported subjective evidence. Subjective evidence usually comes in the form of letters of submissions by individuals and community organisations. And these letters usually raise personal, unsupported opinion that their residences, persons and businesses will be affected and or harmed by electromagnetic radiation. Unfortunately, this subjective, unsupported evidence will have little credibility and be of little weight to enable councils to make an informed decision. If a council relied on this evidence to reject a development or to abate, etc., this decision can easily be overturned by appeal. To remedy, I suggest the objective test needs to be applied in order for the council to have the tools it requires to make a solid and informed decision in order to enable the precautionary principle to be enacted and, if needed, to reject the development. What is this? What is the objective test? I'll clarify. The Australian Government and the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Authority published a fact sheet on June 2015 headed Electromagnetic Sensitivity. In that fact sheet, our PANS advised the following. On the basis of current scientific information, there is no established evidence that EHS is caused by EMF at low levels below exposure guidelines. Our PANS acknowledges that the health symptoms experienced by the affected individuals are real and can be a disabling problem, and advise those affected to seek medical advice from a qualified medical practitioner. The advice of the PANS refers with clarity that an opinion from a qualified medical specialist reigns supreme over any information provided or adopted by a Penzer under the RPANS Act. The advice rightly infers that a medical specialist can, by interpreting the science as collated by a Penzer, can assist medical specialists in coming to a conclusion as to health risks. The medical practitioner has the sole discretion to use science to assist in his or her consulting, diagnosing and treating of who present with symptoms associated with exposure to electromagnetic radiation, or simply from those who require advice as to risk of harm. A Penzer cannot give medical advice. Now, once that a Penzer got wind of my advice, I'm just saying this, but they came up with a disclaimer. Now this has just recently been published, and the very first bit it says here, disclaimer, provision of education, research, information only, always seek professional advice. I'm just going to read that paragraph. This website is presented by Penzer for the purpose of disseminating regulatory information on radiation and health free of charge for the benefits of the public. The website is not a substitute for independent professional advice. Nothing contained in this site is intended to be used as medical advice, and is not intended to be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease, nor should it be used for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for your own health professional's advice. A Penzer does not accept any liability for any injury, loss or damage incurred by use or reliance on the information. So that's their disclaimer. So they are now aware that one, they can't give medical advice, that's solely in the realm of the doctor, and two, they advise that if you've got a problem, go and see a doctor. And so the precaution principle starts to apply. You see that starting to work? Okay. Now, I then continued in my advice very quickly. If the counsel were to be presented with a medical specialist opinion as to harm or potential harm caused by exposure to electromagnetic radiation, then the objective test will be satisfied. Letters to counsel armed with a medical specialist opinion will provide decision makers in counsel with the necessary tools to make an informed and objective decision. TPG would be hard pressed to appeal and debate a decision based on medical opinion of harm to members of the public. Another remedy would be to seek an apprehended violence order against TPG, which is an AVO is effectively an injunction or restraint order that is issued by the courts against a person or corporation that threatens another with violence or is capable of carrying out that threat. How would this apply in TPG's case? Well, quite simply, TPG proceed to install the facility after having been put on notice that proposed actions will cause harm or is likely to cause harm, inclusive of medical opinion, then it would be reasonable that such an action would cause fear, discomfort and apprehension in another, and thus could be seen as a threat to assault. The definition of assault is essentially when a person or corporation applies force or threatens to apply force to another, either directly or indirectly, to another person without that person's consent, causing actual bodily harm or threatens to cause actual bodily harm constitutes a criminal assault. And bodily harm has been defined by the courts to mean at its lowest threshold, discomfort. And discomfort has been defined to include reasonable fear. Hence, the application of medical advice that establishes a person's reasonable fear that electromagnetic radiation is going to harm, then the courts and legislation also defines applies force as expressly covering electrical energy. Then you can apply for a restraint through an APO, or possibly could. Though this is clearly a novel approach to remedy, justices have issued summonses in the past against telco emitters after being satisfied prima facie that the case against them is warranted. In essence, the summons will force TPG to appear in court and to face an AVO complaint by victims seeking restraint. Though a somewhat unusual remedy, it is available for you to pursue if needed, and it works outside of the Telecommunications Act, ACMA, RPANS Act, and the Penzer guidelines. Now, their instructions were that if I'm engaged, firstly, to attempt to negotiate a discrete remedy with TPG, you instruct that a good outcome for you would be if TPG would simply move the facility to another street, that if that remedy was actioned, that you would no longer pursue abatement or an AVO. And then you instructed negotiations failed, then you engaged me to pursue abatement and AVO remedy, and I would recommend that you engage senior counsel, that's Mr. Mellick, to assist me in court appendices. Mr. Mellick and I have appeared together in court on similar AVO equivalent matters against telcos, etc. Now that was obviously handed to TPG. Also the counsellors, we did that beforehand, and we made it very, very clear with the doctor's opinions and advices that there was a bit of a problem. Now, the Randwick Council, God bless them, made a decision. And I'm going to read it to you. We also had a Member of Parliament in there as well, and we did a lot of working behind the scenes to get everything set up and ready for this. And I'm just going to read this out to you very quickly, then I'm going to have to finish. And this is Councillor Murray Maximin. You will find this on the Randwick Council's website. It is my opinion of news of these findings now mean that we councillors should be applying the precautionary principle to this new phone technology. There are 48 streets across the Randwick City Council area that are going to have small cell facilities built within metres of bedrooms. Council should be calling on the federal government to suspend the rollout of small cell mobile phone facilities until both Telstra and TPG can convincingly show that no significant cancer threat actually exists. And then there was a motion put that Randwick Council notes the proposed rollout of another 48 small cell mobile phone facilities across the local government zone area on top of the 18 facilities already approved installations comes at a time when international research by the Ramazan Institute, which is the rat study that we're talking about with cancer, and the US National Toxicology Program reports a link between cell tower radiation and the development of cancer. Accordingly, Council calls on the federal government to intervene to suspend the rollout pending a review of the relevance of the international findings to the safety of residents of urban Australia. So that motion was put, it was obviously approved, and guess what happened? They decided to say, well, we'll move the tower, and then we went, all right, well, you're only going to move it, that's great. Sorry, move the facility, that's fine, to another street. But then I hit them and said, well, I've got 30 other communities in regards to TPG rollout, and I hit them with Victoria, Queensland, and New South Wales. Then we got a response just in March, not that long ago, that said this, and this is from Randwick City Council, says this. Last year on October 15, 2018, a consultation was held between the community and TPG to discuss concerns around the company's small cell tower rollout in the community. TPG initially planned on installing the small cell tower at Dundas Street in Coogee. However, at the community consultation, a proposed less densely populated alternative site at Blenheim Park was suggested. TP agreed to move the infrastructure. So how do we then? We'll keep going. In a council meeting on Tuesday, the very next day, council resolved that the proposed rollout came at a time when international research reported a link between the cell tower radiation and the development of cancer. Accordingly, council called on called on federal government to intervene and suspend the rollout pending a review of the relevance of the international findings to the safety of residents in urban Australia. However, on the 29th of January 2019, TPG made a company announcement that it would cease the rollout of its mobile network altogether.
Wow.
Because of this, TPG no longer intends to proceed with any small cell tower installations or community consultations at Blenheim Park or other locations. Now I've got a letter here from TPG. They sent to the Randwick Council to apologise. It was very nice of them, by the way. Dear Coogee residents, you may be aware that on 29th of January 2019, TPG made a company announcement that it would cease the rollout of its mobile network. Accordingly, I am writing to advise you that TPG does not intend to proceed to consultation as proposed with a proposed alternative small cell facility at Blenheim Park, Coogee. Prior to the company announcement, TPG communicated a decision to propose this alternative site recommended by the community at our public meeting in October regarding the original proposal at Douglas Street. Coogee. In keeping with the 29 January company announcement, TPG intends to proceed with another location as proposed. TPG has regretted the anxiety that some people felt about our small cells and have endeavoured to give residents good reliable information from public health authorities about the safety and regulation of radio facilities, including small cells. We will continue to liaise with residents as required to give them greater peace of mind and ease their concerns. In a sense, they're pulling out completely. So folks, basically there was 900 small cell facilities they'd already installed, cost them $130 million, gone. Okay? They proposed to put 2,300 small cell facilities out there, gone. Okay? And all that was done, in essence, was the community got together, rallied behind their counsellors, okay? Got a medical opinion, and all it is in essence, going to your doctor and saying, Doc, is this safe? Here's some science, tell me if it's safe or not. That's all you need, okay? In essence, okay? Now I've got in my hand doctors' reports, not just from Dr. Cooper, from other doctors, heaps of them. And I'm just going to read some of them. This patient, significant medical problems, including ongoing treatment for breast cancer, depression, anxiety. She feels the proposed tower at main arm, etc., will severely impact her quality of life and psychological well-being. If the tower is built, the main proposal has already exacerbated her anxiety and depression. If the tower is built, I feel her psychological health will be further harmed. As simple as that. Just little letters from you, power of the people. Go and see a doctor and see how you go. And that's how we stop these towers and the small cell facility.